What's up? Welcome back, audience. Hope you're doing good. Doing good. And I'm back drinking mate. I really like how it feels, the drinking mate. It feels very clean. Speaking of clean, in this video, I want to talk about similar stuff as always, but perhaps from a different lens, um, to communicate the essence of the message, right? And in this video, I want to share this realization. It's not like a big realization, but it's just obvious, okay? And that is about that all psychological disorders are what you would call ego or belief systems. All psychological disorders are belief systems. And like I said in the previous video, the point is to have no belief system. Belief system is only necessary. The tree of knowledge only grows when there's suffering. So there has to be some knowledge covering the suffering. But when you burn that tree of knowledge in your soul, which means you let go of the beliefs, and you know when it's burning, when you get triggered, when you go, that's when it's burning, and you should let that burn. Because if you fight it, if you don't let it burn, if you don't go through this uncomfortable state of consciousness, which is only uncomfortable if you don't use courage to face it and surrender to, kind of wash it away. But if you live through it, that belief system, which is what? It's information. It is information that is where the information is not supposed to be, in your soul, in your heart. Okay? And so it just gets nullified into this potential energy, and that's how your soul's supposed to be, always in that potential energy. And but to illustrate it a little bit better, every single psychological disorder stems from that. Now, I want to reiterate this quite strongly because everything goes wrong upon the original sin, original error. Sin is actually an error. It's an error in, you can call it energy flow or attention. And not to expand too much on consciousness and like the source and how it all works out, but the point of it all is that the way the consciousness unfolds or folds is that there's, in order to create a density of reality, there has to be a certain type of split or filtering, if you will. So it's division. So it divides the first when it's just a complete bliss and peace and that flux energy, then it splits, right? And then it becomes like the inner and outer. Before that, there was no inner, no outer. It's just one big bliss, and right, and then there may be, upon the first split, a kaleidoscope of fractals moving around, which would be what happens with the light when it's basically fractaling according to the structure that is universal. Like if you look at the Mandelbrot fractal zoom, right? There's something that's always changing, and sometimes it always stays the same. Now, at the beginning, we have to agree that there's something that never changes, and that becomes a principle, right? And what is not changing in that Mandelbrot fractal zoom is the essence of the fractal principles, like self-similarity is always going to be there. The way it's fractaling, it's always going to be there. There's certain principles always going to be, and they're never going to change. And they stem from a certain type of universal structure, if you will, right? And that structure happens when you fold, consciousness once. Then you fold it again, and like I said, then becomes the inner and the outer. It's not just one big flux of this, which what people call like a 7 density. And the 7 density is just like this kaleidoscope of Mandelbrot fractal zoom bliss. It's just like those two energies like continuously dancing in its never-ending show of light. And that's the 7th density, if you will. This is why in the 7th density there is no inner or outer. And this is why that 7th density energy you can carry with you as a sense. Perhaps you're not fully immersed in it and you don't see the colors, but it's kind of seeping through in your reality, and you kind of see how everything is just changing, and it's just difficult to explain. But what I'm trying to communicate here is that is still part of you, and that's the other direction. Basically, when you go the other direction to find all these what you really are inside of you, then you go, like I said, the me and not me. You have to obviously distinguish this. What is me and not me? Me is obviously the subject. Not me is obviously the object. And what is that? The object? It becomes all of your environment is not me, and all of your essence is me. There's that split that happens. I said we're not going to go into consciousness, but here we are. We are here. So that's the 6th density. There's this awareness of me and not me. Because if you go in 7th, there's no distinguish of me and not me. Okay? And it's not like, oh, you got to be in one or the other. No, they're all like Matryoshka dolls. They're nested inside of you. You are all of those densities. But you may be just like touching, the 4D, 5D, and there's this potential 6D and 7D that you have not yet alchemized towards, but it's there, right? That's like the journey back into the heart, as they call it. That's the game. But you don't need to just go straight to it. It's the process of unfoldment. But one place that you can go straight to through it is what people call 8D, and 8D is infinity. 8 and 0 is actually the same, and sometimes people call it 0 point. Anybody can access the 0 point. It's the most natural state of being, and that it arises when you are not in the mode of seeking with your mind. Basically, the mind is always grabbing all to the next one, because it's the feature of the mind. It's not broken. But when it's doing this about your emotional states, when it becomes in charge of your emotional states and is seeking for the better emotional state, and it can never have it. That's why, like, the first order of business is to discover that 0 point within you, where there's this peace, and you realize, oh, mind can never give me this peace which is already here. And so I'm not going to use the mind anymore to be in charge of my emotions, because it always creates some Frankenstein ideas of how you can get these emotions in a better way, and it becomes like a manipulative entity, right? And that's when the ego is born, which really has no purpose but to be alchemized, right? And before even the belief system is structured, you can catch that and alchemize it because the mind is going to say, like, oh, there's a pain, poof, start blaming other people, or doing this, doing that. It's doing the mind thing. But if you don't ignore it and you don't record it as real and say, no, this is just an emotional state that right now I'm experiencing. That's all it is. Nobody is at fault about this. And right, and then from the 60, which is normally experienced as still like quite geometrical figures, and sometimes people call machine elves or whatever. Like usually when somebody smokes DMT and they pop into this density, there's you and there's other, and then there's other, what appears to be like a Fabergé egg looking figures, which is the soul. This is how, like, there's that geometry and there's that vibration, and that's how we would experience the soul directly. We are, in the essence, are just these dribbling Fabergé eggs. That's the essence of the soul. And then you interact with these beings that are basically your soul family. And obviously I'll get to it to say that your soul family. Anyway, I'll reveal a little illusion in this video of how the simulation actually works, and and it may help explain a lot of things. But anyway, moving on. 5D, it becomes what you recognize now as a normal world. It folds again, right? And in this folding, because in the previous one, what we had, the self and the environment was born. Now in this one, what's born is what I would call the game itself. There it becomes the need to resolve something, right? You can't be passive in this state. You couldn't be the passive in the previous one, but in the 60, it's more like every movement, every motion that you do is ecstatic and blissful. There's no duality yet. So this is why it's just enjoyable to move, basically, enjoyable to do whatever, right? And that state of consciousness is, you may call, innocence. And kids, or even grown-ups, when they not really thinking about doing, but just really enjoying themselves and having a good time, they may touch that state where it just don't really matter what's going on. Everything feels amazing. Anyway, now going to the 5D, like I said, the game starts. But in the 5D, the game is super easy because there's this desire, right? Desire is something, okay, there's something formed this way, but I want it to be formed that way. There's desire, right? But at that level, you just imagine it and you experience it. This is why when people say people living in 5D on this planet Earth, they are connected to the astral reality. Anything that can, you want to experience, you can experience directly through the imagination, lucid dreaming, astral projection, out-of-body experiences. Right? It's there's no lag or necessity to wait for your desire to be fulfilled, because you can directly experience it through these phenomena. And sometimes you can develop imagination so well that you can close your eyes and you can imagine it. It basically hallucinate reality that is more real, more vivid than your 3D reality. And so this is how, on that level, everything is, right? Like if your body would not be connected to the third density, everything manifests instantly, right? But it's not really fun. So the idea was to just, hey, let's fold it down again. And this is, we fold down again and we created 3D, because the 4D and 5D is actually the same density. There was no additional folding to make 4D out of 5D. It's just that there's the 5D and 4D is like this, is closer to that innocence, and then the 4D is more distant from that innocence. It's more about, becoming more conflict based, right? It's then when you cannot find the resolution to your desire, right? Because upon that folding, upon the creation of that game, distortions started happening, and there was this desire to solve these distortions like a puzzle, and they created the game, right? But now when you are folding it again, and that's the birth of 3D, and that's the density that is even more dense, but all it was is just a folding of light many times, and it became so dense that you can't even put your finger through the solid objects. You can imagine something and it appears to you. You can't do any of these phenomena that you can do in the astral reality, which is like liberated and free, and you can fulfill all your desires there, which, by the way, the only way for you to fulfill your desires is through the astral reality anyway. Desires of certain form, desires of certain feelings and states of consciousness, that is done at the soul level, not the mind level. Okay. So, as you can see, this mind, soul, and body phenomena was existing in the 5D as well. Of course, you have a body and everything, but like I said, everything is so instantaneously manifesting that there's no challenge, and there's no conflict, right? It's harmonious. But now, after we fold it again and we go to the third density, and now there is limitations, right? Now you call it the veil, but as you can see, every time the consciousness is folded, you can call it a certain type of veil. This ultimate veil that creates a third density is really not that different from all these previous veils that were created in order to create this game of consciousness, right? But what happened is became so dense that the energy flow back to the regular resolution of desire became more difficult, right? It became more difficult than the actually going with the pacification of that desire through the physical means externally, right? Which we call external. What is the external? Is, in the physical reality, everything that is your environment is that something that is not you, right? And which is a screen, a monitor. And so in that moment, there was this point where before that the energy was always reconciling. So every challenge that arise was just reconciled in the correct way. Every challenge that arise would reconcile the correct. But the last time the folding happened, it wasn't always reconciliating back into the flux and fulfilling that desire. And so there were some beings and some souls who, quote unquote, got trapped. And so they started gravitating towards the pacification of that desire rather than the fulfillment of that desire. And that looks like suffering. So suffering arose and this last folding. And so it became more challenging. It became more challenging to go back to that state of infinite flux through that high density game right now. However, just because it's more challenging doesn't mean that it is impossible. All of these different densities that I mentioned before are still part of you, and these you know, they all must be used in order to play this game. And then, like I said, the first order of business is that the attention, which was always back onto the resolution of your desire, starts slipping away and start being put right now on the instead of the direct resolution of your desire, looking for the pacification of it. It became like the easier way out, so to speak, right? And became like its own gravity. And so that's when the suffering started, and that's when that type of being, that type of entity now needs to find the ways to pacify it. And then if they become really good at it, then they engage in manifestations, engage in sorts of black magic. Why is it black magic? It's because your heart is still black, you're still suffering, but you use your imagination to create something that stops your suffering. Do you see? That's backwards. This is why I do not recommend going on this path. I'm explaining to you very clearly of what happened and why it got derailed, and what's the point, and how to go back to that reconciliation of your consciousness, and not go towards this dark path, because it's a type of error that became a more cutting edge challenge to consciousness, right? This is why, like, we're here on this planet, we are on the cutting edge, it is, the consciousness is in the form of evolving. Do you see what I'm trying to say? It's because if we manage to break through this type of density and to that's what people call like bringing the infinite into temporal, which is basically that last folding, that distortion can be still reconciliated back to that flux through that correcting the distortion by creating a certain type of structure that would correct that distortion. Like, that's the way I would say it, right? It's not what some people may say, like, oh no, it's about just going back into these states, but that's just backing out of the game. The point is to bring that into this reality, bring that infinite state that just makes you feel, for example, that state that makes you feel amazing in a 50 or 6D, and you feel like, happy and at bliss and in total harmony. But the point is to bring that here into this density. That's the whole point. And so that requires a creation of certain type of structure that corrects for all of these distortions that were created, right? And so, and that's the alchemical principle. Only, I mean, I'm using that word alchemy, but there could be many ways to describe this thing. But there is this concept of suffering, which may come in 4 different forms, as I mentioned before: the air challenge, water challenge, fire challenge, and the earth challenge. And there's a certain type of states of consciousness that it feels like, like a pressure, pain, nausea, or confusion, right? And so, like, we all can experience that. And so you can totally, with your attention and awareness, confusion becomes clarity, pain becomes bliss, pressure becomes peace, and that poisonous, venomous feeling becomes ecstasy. And they're all mixed together in some sort of, where, like, you can't really describe what the fuck is going on, but it's just, and that's the essence of your soul. So every time there's this density challenge that comes along, you use it as for alchemical purposes, going back to that flux. You know, as temporal brings you these distortions, you turn it into the infinite. This is why nothing can mess with you. This is why, like, these black magic, bad intentions, evil eyes, it just cannot mess with you, because it's just making you grow. It's just, you beat the enemy only through the infinity, because you're neither this, neither that. It's the fusion of the opposite of, so to speak. You take, whichever role you're playing. This is why I have to say that if this is true, which it is, what I'm describing to you, that all psychological disorders are basically this concept of ego belief systems, and that the solution is to direct facing of that issue directly with your own consciousness, nothing through the external, right? And so then out-of-body experience can help you, lucid dreaming can help you, self-hypnosis can help you, and the best thing that can help you is gnosis, which is what we call direct knowing, and that is just direct attention placing. You don't need to go to the altered state of consciousness, even though it may help. But like I said, that 0 point is accessible to everybody. Okay? And without that, you can't evolve to and bring out like the fifth density capacity, sixth density capacity, and eventually seventh density capacities. And that's the difference between, like that, the healer and the wizard archetype, or the Jesus and the Mary. Jesus is the one that is fucking drilling all the way to that seventh density, but he can't do it without that innocence and that 0 point around him, which is that, Mary. Mary brings that from that whole Holy Spirit, if you will. Holy Spirit, that's Jesus and Mary in one, so to speak. Or the whole and the spirit, like the point and the circle, the black hole and the neutron star. And so both are necessary. But Jesus is the one that's doing the work and doing the mining. And Mary is the one that is providing love and innocence so we can do that. It's a teamwork that's going on. And neither of them can get to that infinite flux by themselves. You need both of these archetypes. And if you're a man, you cannot be a Mary. I mean, come on, man. Like, what are you, some kind of fairy? Sorry about that. So, what do we have here now? That point in the circle, by the way, is what's symbolized the sword and the shield symbolically. Your attention, again, like I was thinking of how better to describe this thing. Again, it's like an eye. You can focus, right? That's, you're drilling, you're mining somewhere, like you're focusing on something that's supposed to be meant to be alchemized, which is like corrupt information in your soul, which is the matrix, and it's in you, right? You are the consciousness, you are the matrix. And so every time you alchemize that, everything around you changes. I don't know exactly how it all pertains, for example, your reality and my reality, but it seems that if I move to one reality and I end up finding you there, then it's just logical that we both ended up moving to that time space reality, right? And alchemy is creating more ideal and ideal and ideal and ideal timelines, okay, but it has to have these quote unquote negative events, which are states of consciousness that are, you would call it negative, has to happen, but they cannot, but they technically they um, potentially they should only happen once. If you're an alchemist and you don't let anything slide, then they only happens once, because that's what I'm noticing. There's a certain type of state that is uncomfortable, but once I break through it, once I alchemize that, there might be another wave coming in that is the same type of energy, but because it's already alchemized, it just fills me up with like amazing feeling, which before was uncomfortable. Now it's just feels amazing. That's why that process is permanent, and that's why it is an actual solution to all your psychological problems. And when you live this like at the cutting edge, and you're saying, and that's why another thing, people say, God first. And I was thinking, what the hell does that mean? It means that you got to put your attention on what I'm describing, right? One of those 4 negative emotion challenges or whatever. And then look how this ends all these bullshit discussions of the psychology. And I know some people like may be see, this is why psychologists are like, unless they already realize that it's not about psychology and they are into this, they are the most, well, I don't want to insult everybody who's doing psychology, but like, if you're doing psychology, you're going the wrong way. And this is why people, they called Jungians and all these psychologists, they never really figured out the ending of suffering, because they're still in the mind thing, analyzing all these things. But the answer is not in the mind thing. The answer is just facing directly the issue with your attention and awareness. Another way of saying, like with your eye, I can look right now, I focus on the screen, but also I'm aware of the periphery, right? And so that's where like the masculine way would be like facing that thing, looking directly at it. And then when it ends, poof, the periphery arises, and that's how you would deal with the issue in the masculine way. In the feminine way, you would be like giving a hug to it and becoming aware of periphery so much that periphery later goes back into the center, right? So there's 2 ways, and if you look at the toroidal field, you can see that you can end up at the exact same point through expansion or contraction. You can end up in exactly the same point, the masculine path and the feminine path. But the important thing is that if you're a man and these challenges are coming to you on a regular basis through time cycles and time fractals, and you went in a feminine way, they're gonna come back to you again and bring you on a silver platter and saying you have not dealt with this yet, because you tried to do it the wrong way, that you have chosen the wisdom, and that's why you will graduate as soon as you go and do it in the right way. Okay, and it's not a coincidence why you're choosing the male body or the female body. Okay, so the essence you cannot trick. If you're a male, like I said, as long as your consciousness is being projected, as long as you're not that flux energy, you have to be Jesus cannot be Mary, Mary cannot be Jesus, right? It's the game is that they're both are necessary, those 2 archetypes. And it's just too many damn fucking Marys out there, right? and maybe some women are also trying to be Jesuses and wizards and kind of stuff like that, and that just they end up being witches. And I'm going to explain like carefully this dynamic, right? So if we agree that all beliefs are meant to be alchemized and the tree of knowledge just belongs in your brain and not in your heart, then we have to agree that any kind of distortion from your normal or equilibrium state, which is like if you're a male, then it's a yang. If you're a female, it's a yin. Any kind of distortion in your essence. I'm not talking about the skills. I'm going to talk about the skills as well, because there are certain type of masculine and feminine skills that you can do, but they are not related to the essence. Okay, so we're not confusing this. I'm talking directly about this phenomena of ego arising, and ego arises if a male is also trying to be female in his essence. It's a belief. It's a belief. It's only believing that has a feminine essence, but it's a belief. It's a lie. It's not true. The same thing with women. One day, saying like, well, I gotta get some of the masculine essence. That's also creating a belief. So that's why the masculine female, or in the essence, is a type of ego. The feminine essence in a male is a type of ego, and I recognize that in me, because and other people too. And that also must be alchemized. Some tendencies, for example, that it's time to face something, time to do something, time to do some sort of courageous act. But if you are pacifying it, that's kind of beating around the bush about it. It's a feminine type of motion, right? And like I said, that's why in the next cycle it's going to be brought to you on a silver platter again. Okay? And that's just the way the metaphysics work. Now, on a skill level, if you have a masculine if you're polarized masculinely in your soul, which if you are polarized masculine in your soul like 100%, which you end up being just half of it, then you immediately are filled up with the other half. And like I said, through the path of the wisdom, you find love. Through the path of love, you find wisdom. But you got to be all the way wisdom to find love, all the way love to find wisdom. Okay? That's when you're what you would call pure.